Ronnie Kray was buried 5 years ago. The East End turned out in huge numbers to honour its most notorious son. In his day, the most feared criminal in the underworld and Britain's most famous gangster. Using exclusive new information and eyewitness accounts, we can now reveal the underworld alliance that sustained the Kray firm's reign of terror. Reggie Kray, the surviving twin, was released for the day to attend the funeral. Tonight, he is 31 years, 6 months, 3 weeks and 2 days into a life sentence for murder. Among the mourners is bank robber Freddie Foreman. His partnership with the Kray firm goes back 40 years and threatened to defeat the detective who jailed the Krays.
Freddie Foreman was far more involved with the Krays than I believed at the very beginning. He was a serious member of the family. I didn't realise that at the very beginning. I thought the Krays were constrained to using their own people. But Foreman was somebody that they could call upon at any time when they wanted some serious business to be perpetrated. Foreman was an evil man. He was a hitman that was open to offers. And so I think that, bearing in mind his track record, 30 years imprisonment would have been justified.
Foreman was one of the pallbearers. He'd just completed a prison sentence for handling money from the biggest cash robbery in British history. Tonight, he talks frankly about his career in crime and life inside the firm. Freddie Foreman had a lifelong association with the Krays and became one of the most feared and ruthless criminals of his generation. But he started out as an ordinary thief.
After the austerity of the war years, you just sort of drifted into stealing because there were things you couldn't afford and you couldn't obtain unless you went and stole these things, and there was a ready market for it. And nobody refused anything on the cheap.
What do you want if you don't want money? What do you want if you don't want gold? Say what you want and I'll give it you, darling. Wish you wanted my love, baby. What do you want if you don't?
Then the electrical goods came on the market with the washing machines and the televisions and stuff like that, radiograms. Everybody wanted one of those. Of course, we could get them and sell them at a third of the price. They jumped them. That's when I came into contact with Charlie Kray. He was a good fence. He did well. Charlie used to buy a lot of stuff in East London from me, and we struck up a friendship. They used to come over with their van, and I had a lock-up at Pernhill. We used to come and load up there, take what we get back to the East End. And then, of course, his brothers, the twins, was younger than him, and they were just coming up and always into some sort of trouble or one thing or another and building up a reputation.
An East End bank robber became the Krays' trusted first lieutenant. Albert Donahue was the go-between in the secret alliances that held the Kray empire together, an empire founded on violence, as he discovered.
I was working with a little crowd in the East End who were doing security vans and things like that. One of the guys that was collected and tied to a chair, Ronnie Kray put a poke around his face and burnt him. He was saying, who did that, you know, but he wouldn't tell us. So I said, if someone done that to me, I'd be out. I'd blow his bloody head off, you know. Anyway, I went to the Twins pub in Bethnal Green, and I was drinking for a little while. I didn't know is they'd sent off for a gun. And Reggie shot me in the foot. So I went to the hospital. Then I hear the firm's looking for me. So I went round there, went round to their house. The three Krays were there, Charlie, Reggie and Ronnie. And then Ronnie said, well, why don't you stop all that robbery business and come and get your money with us? On the firm, put me on a pension. If you took the punishment, He was considered a good guy. You know.
South London was Freddie Foreman's patch, but he had to leave it behind when his fingerprints were found on a lorry used to steal a consignment of radiograms.
So the only thing to do was go on my toes, go over to the East End of London. It was like crossing that little bit of water was a different world, you know, it was a different area. It was, the police wouldn't know you or recognise you in the street. In South London I was known very well. So to go over there, you felt safe. And the twins and Charlie, they fixed me up with a flat right opposite the Blind Beggar's pub. I lived there. I was indebted to the twins in a way for looking after me, and which they did. They took care of me. And of course they was also propping bits of business to me at the same time.
Under the wing of the Krays, Foreman took the next step up the criminal ladder. Life on the run put him in the midst of other ruthless and committed villains, men from the shebeens and dice games of the East End that Foreman forged into a gang, a heavy mob that set its sights on cash targets. Their activities made the front pages, including this spectacular failure. In December 1961, Foreman's gang attacked a bank van carrying wages worth today over £1 million. PC Ted Buckle and his dog Flash were in the van.
We were hit on three sides as I came off my seat. I saw somebody jumping out of the lorry in front on the near side with a crash helmet on and goggles. And then I saw other people coming out with pickaxe handles, also with helmets on.
And we had a couple of big vans and a lorry that reversed back into the front of the van. We had to come along the side of it in another van, which tore down the side of it. It smashed the side windows. Because there was like half a dozen guys in the back and caused a bit of confusion.
There were two on our side at that moment smashing in the windows. Obviously their intention was to keep us inside that vehicle. I said, I'm going out with my dog. As I opened up the door and started getting out, my dog automatically leapt at the first person who was at that moment bringing the pickaxe handle down to hit the vehicle again, changed direction and hit the dog straight on the head. And I instantly went for one of these fellas with the pickaxe handle, spun him round, put my arm round his neck and held him in a neck lock.
But out jumped the police officer and his dog, a big city copper, and that was okay. But the copper was fighting with one of the other firm, and the dog was biting lumps out of his arse, you know, while we got the chain in the back and ripped the two back doors off. And the doors came off like a bit of butter and fell in the middle of the road. And then when we tried to get in the back of the van to get the money, which was laying there in the big leather cricket bags, all lined up, with the ready cash on wage packets. But two guards were standing there in a firing position with these two guns, two Berettas. They would turn the tables then. If you want a bullet in the head, you know, and then he climbed up in the back of the van because the bullets were flying all around the street. It wasn't the robbers using the guns, it was the guards protecting the money. And there's one of our firm crawling around on his hands and knees, and he's been shot right through the head, in one side and out the other it's gone.
I saw these men running towards the getaway van, the back door was open and all jumping in. And then one of them shouted something and they all came back out of that vehicle with their pickaxe handles. At that moment I knew that I had a serious problem, that they intended to get at me to get their other person away. I knew my life was at stake. They meant it to take me out. They started raining blows on me and I had to let him go. And once I let go, they just turned and ran. So I still have scars on my head. I'm left-handed, and I couldn't use my left arm at all, and I thought it was just broken. But in fact, of course, they'd numbed it completely.
The failed raid left the police with plenty of forensic evidence. In the back of one of the raiders' vans, they found the fingerprint of a known criminal. It was on this gas bottle. Foreman's gang needed a false alibi. Only an unimpeachable witness could convince a jury that the thief was elsewhere at the time of the raid. The Kray twins had the solution.
The twins found a particular doctor who came and gave evidence for one of the people put the chap in his surgery at the time of the robbery. So there was no way they could put him at the scene. So naturally, he was found guilty of accessory before the fact, and was given 3 years
instead of
15.
In the struggle that followed, one of the bandits was shot. At the same time, the police constable was injured and he is now in hospital. As far as we know, no money was taken, and the gang made their getaway, carrying with them the wounded man.
We all came away licking our wounds. Also, the man who was shot was seriously injured. You can't go to hospital, you can't do anything, because you're just offering him up and putting him inside for the rest of his life. Because I had a private doctor who I could trust and got him round to inject him and try and prevent any further damage, but it was too serious. And that was the end of it, I'm afraid. That was the end of the guy. And we had to deal with it ourselves. We had a little sideline of the smuggling, which was down in New Haven, bringing watches over from Belgium and France, going out to sea in a fishing boat, you know, a very safe old boat. So we had that facility open to us from the old fisherman who was down there, and that's where we'd actually disposed of him. We took him out, he knew all the shipping lanes and the fishing lanes where it was safe to put down anybody, and wrapped up the right way, and chicken wire and stuff, you know. So that is the way to do it, weighed down. And that's what happened.
How many people have you personally dispatched in that way?
It sounds a bit gruesome, Frank, to talk about that.
More than one? Two?
Yeah.
London was less security conscious in the 1960s, and the Krays were a magnet for any employee with a grudge. With inside information, Foreman's gang could simply sneak through a door in the lunch hour and come away with an enormous prize.
They then made a cool getaway with 40 bars of gold worth £200,000, and they closed all the doors behind them to leave no trace.
The twins also gave me some Charles Pixley. On this particular occasion, there was half a ton of gold in gold bars delivered there. And it was given to me, and we went to work and we got it, you know, the half a ton of gold, which was good, nice, sweet. And the twins was happy, everyone was happy. So I was indebted to them again, once again. And of course they got their corner, they got their whack.
Foreman's share meant he could turn down the Great Train robbery just 3 months later in August 1963. But he became intimately involved in the aftermath because of his relationship with Frank Williams, the deputy head of Scotland Yard's elite flying squad. Williams was hunting the train robbers, and he was Foreman's kind of copper.
I had a good relationship with Frank Williams. I knew him from back in the 50s when he was a DI in Kennington, when I had the club in Lambeth Walk. You could never bribe him or offer him money. He would never do anything with money. But he would say, if they want to come in, they come in, and I'll treat them fair, and I'll treat them on what the evidence is.
Most of the great train robbers were caught and sentenced to an unheard of 30 years in prison. Some of them, including Buster Edwards, had got away and fled the country. 3 years later, he was tired of life on the run and wanted to come home, even if it meant prison. He planned to return some of the loot in exchange for a lighter sentence. Freddie Foreman was the only man he knew with the police contacts to fix it. On September the 19th, 1966, £50,000 of Buster's money turned up in a phone box. The public was puzzled. Many wondered how much of the £50,000 was to enrich the flying squad and how much to return to the post office. Nobody was quite sure of the truth.
I met Buster and flew out to Germany and met him in Cologne, and then arranged for him to come back and give himself up to Frank Williams in my public house. I found Frank, he came round, and Buster got a fair shake. He wasn't verballed up or fitted up with any evidence. And he got half the sentence. He got, instead of 30 years, he got 15, which was something you could cope with and handle.
Foreman was carving out a unique position for himself in the underworld. On one hand, he had the support and friendship of the Krays. On the other, an open line to the two top detectives in the flying squad.
I mean, Frank Williams was hoping to be the head of the flying squad when Tommy Butler retired. He was ambitious in that respect.
And you and Frank negotiated that deal for
negotiated, yeah. I mean, I was taking Tommy Butler and Frank the Simpsons in the stand and buying them lunch and expensive bottles of wine and everything, you know.
In September '67, there was pressure to jail the London gangsters. Chief Superintendent Leonard Reed was given the task of building a squad to tackle the Krays. He did not subscribe to the belief, common among detectives at the time, that you need a thief to catch a thief.
Do you think that Freddie Foreman and Frank Williams had a proper relationship?
Well, it was a relationship that other police officers have indulged in. I don't particularly think it was a very healthy relationship at all.
You never actually joined the flying squad, did you?
No, I didn't. I didn't want to join the flying squad.
Any particular reason?
Well, it was just that I didn't like the activities of some of the members of the flying squad, and when one was working as one was expected to with a team, it was very difficult not to become embroiled in some of the activities that they got up to, and I felt that I could survive much easily and better on my own.
Corrupt activities?
Yes.
In part 2, the Krays and Freddie Foreman throw the flying squad off the scent as they descend into a spiral of increasing violence and then murder. In January 1965, Freddie Foreman became a murderer after his brother George was targeted in an underworld vendetta. Two villains armed with a shotgun blasted George Foreman in the groin when he opened his front door to them. He nearly died. The information network of the Krays helped Freddie Foreman take his revenge. The attackers were tracked to a Bethnal Green pub. One of them was a small-time thief called Ginger Marks. Foreman and his mob raced to the pub and gunned down Marks in the street. They bundled the corpse into the back of the car. All that was left at the scene were Marks's spectacles and a pool of blood.
Naturally, I wanted revenge, and it was payback time, you know, for me. And as soon as I got it over with, I couldn't live with it. I had to do it. I mean, the police knew, and everyone in the underworld really knew what went down there. And I didn't need the brains of Lloyd George to work it out, but proving it was another thing. And everybody who was associated with me was under investigation and getting their doors kicked in and all their properties spun, you know.
And nobody would talk because they feared you?
Well, they never, it was just not fear, it was out of respect. They never spoke. That's what it was all about.
The body took the boat journey from New Haven. The police had nothing to go on. Freddie Foreman had got away with murder. It made a deep impression on the Krays.
The twins, I suppose they looked at it as an achievement in a way. should use a different word there, probably. Not
The achievement is to get
It's
away
to
with it.
to do something that was serious, the major capital thing you can do in this life, and to do it successfully, I suppose. I said, well, you know, you mustn't mess with those people, because you know what happened.
In early 1966, the whisper on the street was that the Krays and a South London gang led by the Richardson brothers were about to go to war. But a fight at this Catford nightclub put paid to all that. The Richardson gang suffered a severe and unexpected defeat at the hands of a group of armed local villains. Eddie Richardson and Mad Frankie Fraser, the gang's chief enforcer, were in hospital with gunshot wounds. The shootout left one man dead and others seriously injured. The defeat of the Richardsons robbed Ronnie Kray of the violent night out he craved, but he was not to be thwarted.
Police are still searching for the gunman who shot a man in the bar of an East End saloon. The dead man was 38 and married. Detectives have
Less than 24 hours later, the Kray intelligence network passed Ronnie Kray the news that a straggler from the Richardson camp, George Cornell, was drinking in the Blind Beggar. Ronnie Kray strode in and shot him dead in front of a dozen terrified customers. Ronnie Kray was arrested, and Freddie Foreman went to lean on the witnesses. His intervention, backed by his reputation as an unconvicted murderer, ensured that the first police investigation ran into a wall of silence.
I went to see them afterwards, and you know, just to confirm that what was being said. It's nice if you're in the toilet, you hear guns, you don't come out. And if you don't see anything, you can't say anything about it.
You were there to guarantee the unwritten law that you don't talk.
Yeah, to that extent, yeah.
Freddie Foreman and the Krays were forming a unique alliance in the underworld. The fear they generated allowed them to penetrate London's clubland and take their extortion rackets into the West End unopposed. Mafia money from America helped open the fashionable Colony Club, and the Krays and Foreman were partners. It seemed they had struck gold.
I would go up to the West End and collect from the clubs, and I was after the Colony. The Colony was paying $3 grand a quarter.
Albert used to bring money from the Colony Club and different businesses, and Starlight Club and this one and that one. He's always bringing money out because we was involved in lots of different enterprises.
The twins and Foreman would do bits and pieces of business. Not always gang stuff, but it was like tit for tat. You handle my business, and we can be somewhere else. We can be at the dogs, we can be talking to the vicar. Whichever kept the other person in their status quo.
How formidable an alliance would that be in the underworld at that time?
Pretty strong, very strong.
I was a sort of backup to the Krays, and people knew that, and they knew that I was very close with them, and their enemies became your enemies. People were prepared to go to war with the twins. I think they had second thoughts when they knew I was behind them.
By the mid-60s, what was it you would do for each other?
Well, we were prepared to do probably anything that was asked and without any questions.
This was the moment when the Krays' view of their own power became so deluded that they planned a crime solely to enhance their reputations. In 1966, they decided to spring Frank Mitchell from Dartmoor Prison. Aged 37, Mitchell was an East Ender who had spent half his life behind bars in violent defiance of authority. He had escaped 6 times and was nicknamed the Mad Axeman. The system could not handle him, and he ended up worse off than many murderers, serving a life sentence with no date of release. The Mitchell myth appealed to the Krays, but was it the real man?
Mitchell, he'd been birched, he'd been flogged, he'd been certified insane, he'd been in solitary confinement. He'd had an awful life, really. And then when he got to Dartmoor, he began to change. Previously, he took great pleasure in assaulting prison officers and became, because of that, a kind of a hero amongst his fellow inmates. But then when he realised that he was the man that was suffering all the punishment as the result of that, he realised that there was no percentage in that. And so by the time his escape was effected, he was a totally different man altogether.
On the 12th of December 1966, Mitchell ran away from a prison working party to rendezvous with two members of the Krays firm, who drove him to a hideout in London. Like his previous escapes, this was an act of protest. Mitchell wanted a date of release from his life sentence, but his repeated appeals to the Home Office had all failed, despite the support of the Dartmoor governor. He looked to his home ground for help.
Mitchell was an East Ender, and the idea was the Krays could further identify themselves as benefactors, not only to criminals but to society, by forcing the Home Secretary to give Mitchell a date of release and then send him back and say, now we've achieved something, and there again the Krays have done something that is acceptable and commendable as far as the criminal underworld is concerned.
So once again, it's reputation.
Absolutely, reputation.
It was a crime born of vanity, but it went horribly wrong. In the hideout, Mitchell became increasingly desperate. The authorities would not budge, and he found he had swapped one prison for another. The Krays got him a prostitute, a club hostess called Lisa Prescott, to calm him down. But Mitchell had tasted freedom and wouldn't give it up.
Mitchell refused to go back, and then they were confounded. Now what do we do? And so the decision then was taken very clinically, very cold-bloodedly, that they would kill him, and that's what they did.
The Krays' invited guest was no longer welcome. Ronnie Kray ordered Mitchell's execution. Reggie Kray, Charlie Kray and Freddie Foreman gathered to work out the details of how to get away with another murder. The motive was clear: self-preservation.
Frank Mitchell was endangering everyone's future, in a sense, because you just didn't know how far away it was going to go. It protected everybody from getting arrested, because that was going to be the final outcome.
Within hours, Foreman's gang was on the road with murder in mind. They had a stake in this too. Mitchell had become a threat to the alliance with the Krays and everything that went with it.
They were benefiting from the activities twins were creating in this empire, where it looked very lucrative and we were going to get money from it. And it could have led to much bigger and better things.
Was it put to you in those terms?
That was obvious without even discussing it.
Yeah, they wanted your expertise in this, and your expertise was to make the problem, the evidence, the body
disappear. Everything to disappear.
Mitchell trusted Albert Donahue, the man who had taken him off the moor. It became his job to persuade Mitchell to leave the hideout and get into the van in nearby Ladysmith Avenue. Donahue insists he did not know what would happen next. Freddie Foreman and another man shot Mitchell dead as the van pulled away. Donahue witnessed the killing and afterwards realised why Foreman got the job.
A pretty well-known shooter on the firm, Elfie Gerrard, he'd done a few. Someone talks about half a dozen. I'm pretty sure they did the Ginger Marks business. And disposal. No body, no crime. That was the belief.
Frank Mitchell was taken down to New Haven, the smuggling operation we had. There was always a facility there to use if we needed it, which became very useful. And that's where we actually disposed of it. I think myself, how did I come to do that sort of thing? Well, a little bit of madness there myself, you know. You think you're untouchable. If you do things right, you'll get away with it, and would have got away with it if it wasn't for people opening their mouths, you know.
Would you be a happier man now if you had got away with it?
No, I'd been a happier man now if I hadn't have done it. And if I never had to commit these sort of crimes, but I'm not proud of the fact what I've done. I feel sorry and I apologise to their families or anybody that was left behind. It's late in the day to apologise, but I sincerely do.
12 days after his escape, Mitchell was dead. But the biggest manhunt in British criminal history carried on. The public, and more importantly the politicians, wanted results. So the flying squad was put in overall command of the operation to find Mitchell. They quickly concluded he was alive and safely out of the country.
There was an individual officer, a chief inspector in the flying squad, who was identified as being the man that would collate all this information about Mitchell, and he was very convinced that Mitchell was in Ireland. Now, where he got that information from, I don't know.
The officer involved was Frank Williams. Along with another detective, Williams sent a memo, which has been made public for this programme, asserting strongly that Mitchell was undoubtedly in Ireland. In the memo, addressed to the commander of London's detective force, the officers claimed that two entirely separate sources had confirmed that Mitchell was in the Irish Republic. It said the information was undoubtedly correct. The memo was written in response to this newspaper article, reporting the widespread underworld rumour that Mitchell had been shot and dumped at sea. Mitchell's disappearance came just 3 months after Freddie Foreman had been negotiating with Williams over the surrender of train robber Buster Edwards. Foreman was almost certainly the source quoted by Williams, but the flying squad detective would have had no idea that he was talking to the murderer, much less someone central to the Kray plan to lay false trails.
There was letters written to say that he's still alive. They was trying to make inroads to people who have influence to filter information back, to get back to the police.
Would you have taken the opportunity to reinforce that idea with Frank Williams and the police that Mitchell was safe and abroad?
Yeah. I mean, that was bandied around all over London. And of course, I'd give it credence if I had it. I'd say, yeah, possibly that's right. You know, that's the best thing for him.
The police swallowed the criminal's line completely, leaving Mitchell's family to cope with the ugly rumours that began to circulate about his ultimate fate.
Because 1 minute one person was saying he was in the Bow Road flyover. Someone else said he was fed to the pigs. Someone else said he was down a sand pit. He'd been cremated in a cemetery. It's just all different rumours.
So it was horrible going to work because like we used to be followed by people like in
What, newspapers?
Newspapers and that, and like you used to get pointed at and things like that. It wasn't very nice for us.
Pointed out why? I mean, what would they say?
They'd just say like that, that's Frank's Mitchell's sisters and things like that.
The Mad Axeman sisters?
No, I didn't say the Mad Axeman sisters.
They did.
Did they? I can't remember that, so.
And what was that like to endure?
Well, it wasn't very nice, but then I didn't care because we knew he wasn't a Mad Axeman, so it didn't really bother us.
What would you say to people who enjoy the myth that's grown up around the gangsters and the criminals of that time?
I think it's sort of a load of crap, in other words.
They wouldn't enjoy it so much if it had
they
happened to their family, any of their families.
The Krays had now got away with murder, twice. They were beginning to acquire a taste for it. In part 3, Reggie Kray gets his own grisly initiation. Reggie Kray went out to kill so as to build up his bad name. He became a murderer at this North London house. The unsuspecting victim was Jack the Hat McVitie, a fellow thief and local heavy. He was lured to a party in the basement and Reggie stabbed him to death.
Once Ronnie had done Cornell, he's always screaming at Reggie, "I've done mine, it's time you done yours." You know.
A dozen witnesses helped to affirm his new status as a killer. The Kray twins walked off the scene, leaving the rest of the firm to clear up the mess. In the panic that followed, the corpse was dumped in a car just yards from Freddie Foreman's doorstep. He later served a 10-year sentence for disposing of the body.
As I explained to Ronnie, that's me. Finished. Don't want to be involved. I don't want to know anything about anything in the future. No more. Because I wasn't going to play the part of an undertaker to clear up the mess after they, on one of their crazy nights out, you know. I knew that Ronnie, his temperament and he'd be phoning me up or sending people over or something every, 2s and 3s in the morning, just iron somebody out and want me to clear up after him. I said, "No, this is it, No, don't start going around shooting people or thinking you get away with it, You thought yourself, where's it going to end, There was a real feeling of foreboding. The atmosphere was such, I couldn't see into the future where I could before, I used to plan ahead, but now I was there in a position where I didn't know where it was going to lead to. Frank Mitchell was the writing on the wall. The firm, I could see that they was cracking up. Their nerves were jangled and, and they was all popping pills and stuff like that. They was in a terrible state. And I did try and clear up the situation so that they could survive.
Chief Superintendent Nipper Reed was now targeting the Krays with a task force of over 20 officers, each one hand-picked, because he feared corrupt officers would leak details of his inquiry to the Krays. So he based his team at Tintagel House, south of the Thames, and well away from the rumour mill of the Met.
I knew that if I remained at Scotland Yard, the likelihood was that information from my office would find its way back to the Kray organisation. I wanted people that I knew and could trust in my squad, and I told all of them that they must under no circumstances visit Scotland Yard alone, that they would go in pairs so that they couldn't be confronted by one of their alleged friends.
Nipper Reed was fighting a 30-year-old culture of sleaze, which encouraged detectives and villains to come to a cosy accommodation with each other.
You used to meet up with people in the flying squad the same as you did other villains in there. You walk in a pub and they'd be in the other bar and they'd send a drink over, you'd send a drink over and you go sit there, probably be kicking your door down on the weekend and swagging you down the neck, putting you on IDs, and there were police officers, obviously, you could straighten out, but we don't want to talk about them because they did a service, and if they get an arrest and they get a conviction, and if they could drop out a little bit of the nasty stuff and the evidence, well, that was fair enough.
Foreman should have been the flying squad's #1 target. As a busy and determined armed robber, he was precisely the sort of criminal the squad had been set up to deal with, not make deals with. Foreman was leading a charmed life. Some detectives thought they knew why.
Freddie Foreman had a very close contact with a man who was the deputy head of the flying squad at that time. There's no doubt that he was an informant of some kind for that man, and it was probably a reciprocal arrangement, and based on that, he was probably forewarned about certain matters that he may have been accused of or suspected of.
How many convictions have you got for robbery?
None.
None?
None.
Is there an explanation for that?
The explanation is there's no evidence to prove that I did these things.
How many times have you been tried for murder then?
Twice.
And what's been the result on those occasions?
I was acquitted on 2 occasions.
In May 1968, Nipper Reed and his team arrested the Krays in their mother's new council flat. The timing was not of his choosing. The police had a mole in the firm who told them that another murder was being planned. The firm was rounded up and ended up in Brixton Prison. But Nipper's case against them was not yet strong. He had no signed statements and no forensic evidence. He had to use a mixture of bluff and guile to make his case.
This place is the chapel of Brixton Prison, and just beyond the door at the bottom is A Wing, where all these prisoners were kept. And I would come late at night and booking as the Reverend XYZ, and they would be brought to me quietly, without their shoes, slipping along these corridors and down to see me, because it was important from their point of view that they were never seen to be giving any kind of intelligence or statement to me. Otherwise their life was in jeopardy. They all understood that.
The Krays only knew one tactic: fear. Now that they were behind bars, their idea of a defense against the murder charges was simple: to terrorize members of the firm into pleading guilty to them.
I show Reggie my notes. He looks at them and he ripped them up. So Ronnie says, what we've decided is you stand up for Mitchell and we'll take all the other stuff. The other stuff. Once people know they're off the murders, no one's going to accuse them of grievous bodily harm or fraud or anything. They're going to get probation. So I said, I thought, and I went, no. And that was it. Temperature dropped. I had a visit in the afternoon. My mother came up with the baby. As I passed the baby back, I gave her this note. Like, go to Bow Street, tell Nipper Reed he can have the business if he comes to see me.
Once Donahue had turned his back on the Krays, the case against them began to build, but the fear lingered on. Detectives from Nipper's squad traced Lisa, the prostitute who spent 4 nights with Mitchell and heard the shots that killed him. They picked her up in the early hours of the morning and made south for Tintagel House, away from Scotland Yard, in an unmarked car.
And she knew enough about London to know that when she came out over Lambeth Bridge, she should have turned left, and she turned right. So she was convinced that my officers were members of the Krays gang that had come to pick her up. Terrified, she opened the door of the car that she was in and ran to the parapet, trying to throw herself over into the river before she was dragged back. And the reason that she did that was, although this was 2 years later, she was still terrified because she had been told, don't forget, wherever you are in the world, we will find you. And if you open your mouth, you'll be dead. And so that threat still applied as far as she was concerned. She was still terrified to the extent that she would throw herself out of a moving car.
The Mitchell trial was the 3rd murder charge the Krays had faced at the Old Bailey. The twins were already serving life sentences for killing Cornell and McVitie. It was a confusing trial. There was no body, no forensic evidence to speak of, and the crime was nearly 3 years old. What's more, the principal prosecution witness was a member of the Krays gang. Foreman and the Krays flatly denied all knowledge of Mitchell's murder, and the jury acquitted them.
I went to the trial with my sister, but my sister went up on the dock, as you call it, and I sat in the back. And as she said her piece, like, you know, she brought forward, she spat at the Krays and called them pigs.
We thought they should have been found guilty. We was all upset.
Do you feel you've had justice?
No, we've not had justice. Frankie's still missing. We don't know where he is. We've never been able to bury Frankie.
The Krays and Foreman got away with murder because the jury faced an impossible choice: which villain to believe. Albert Donahue, in the witness box, was a member of the firm who had originally been charged with Mitchell's murder. Freddie Foreman, in the dock, was only identified as the killer by Donahue. Who to believe is still a puzzle.
You delivered him to the van in which he was shot dead, and then Foreman's gang allowed you to walk away. I mean, that's pretty compelling evidence that you knew what was going to happen.
Well, yeah, it might seem that way, but on the other hand, it could be... You could take it exactly the opposite way.
How so?
That I didn't know, but I've been involved, so that was it. I've got to keep my mouth shut, you know. Which is the way the twins work. Practically all their murders were done openly in front of witnesses.
Did Albert Donahue know that there was a plan to kill Frank Mitchell?
Yeah, well, he knew that was going to happen, whether it was then and there or 10 minutes or half an hour later. He knew that was the outcome.
If I'd known, I could have gone missing, or something like that, you know, or been late. Could have cocked it up anyway, you know. I could have said I couldn't separate him from the girl, bring the girl out. They go, oh, they don't want a double job. So they'd have probably backed out. A million things I could have done to stop it, had I known.
So you believed that he was going to the country?
On that night, yeah. I assumed that sometime later he probably would go.
Would you have gone driving to the country with Alfie Gerrard and Freddie Foreman in a van without windows?
No. No.
But there's always the element of someone doing the talking, and which in this case is the only reason that the truth was found out. When you look at the position that Albert Donahue was in, he was actually charged with the murder and asked to take it on board and put his hands up to it. You can't ask anybody to do that. Nobody is going to put his hands up to a murder he's not committed, even though he may be an accessory to the fact. I don't blame him. I just think that he could have done it differently. And all he needed to have said was that he took him to the back of a van with the engine running and lights showing, and they opened the door and he climbed in and he shut the door and walked away.
Donahue was sentenced to 2 years for aiding Mitchell's escape and released on time served. The Krays and Foreman went to jail because of other murders, but it left a bitter aftertaste for those seeking justice for Frank Mitchell.
This was the one that I wanted a conviction on, because I must, during the course of that investigation, found sympathy for Mitchell because of his situation, because of the life that he'd led, and I wanted desperately and badly a conviction, and I was very disappointed because I believed, and still do, that Donahue was telling the truth.
This film, shot by Nipper Reed, shows the Krays' final sight of the outside world as they were driven up the M1 to start their life sentences. For Frank Mitchell, there was no justice even in death, but the investigation of his murder destroyed the underworld alliance between the Krays and Freddie Foreman. That partnership made the gangland of the 60s unique, and its downfall stifled the growth of organised crime.
The murder of Mitchell was the first really big charge that we made, and that was the breakthrough. And once we got that one, and that started off, and it began to roll, and we wiped everybody up then, the whole of the gang and Freddie Foreman were enmeshed in this big sweep, and then people started to crack a little bit. So in that sense, yes, Frank Mitchell did get his revenge, because he you could say quite convincingly, was the man that started it all off and caused the destruction of the Kray Empire.